Good morning. We are starting the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot in today's class. In the previous two classes, we discussed different aspects of modern literature. And when I discussed different aspects of modern literature, I basically focused on novels, dramas, and poetry as well. Now we are starting the poem in today's class. And let's start with some background, not only the background about T.S. Eliot and his poetic career as well. The love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, the poem which we will start in today's class. The poem is basically commonly known as Prufrock, the first professionally published poem by American-born British poet T.S. Eliot. He was born in the United States, but later he became basically poet of England. And Eliot began writing Prufrock in February 1910, before the First World War. And it was first published in June 1915 issue of Poetry, a magazine of verse, at the inspiration of Ezra Pound. Now, this man was very important in Eliot's life because this is the man who inspired Eliot to compose poems, and not only that, he also inspired T.S. Eliot to publish his poems as well, and he has a huge contribution to the publication of the Wasteland as well because he scrutinized the poem in a beautiful manner, and later he also did a kind of you can say editing of the poem, and he shortened the poem. He shortened the length of the poem. The Wasteland, the most famous poem by T.S. Eliot. So this man is the Pound, who himself was a poet. He played a very important role in the poetic career of T.S. Eliot. And T.S. Eliot, as I said even in my previous class, is the most significant modern poet, English poet. The poem was later printed as part of 12 poem pamphlet titled Prufrock and Other Observations in 1917 as well. So first it was published in 15 and then again in another volume in 1917. At the time of its publication, Prufrock was considered bizarre, that means strange, but is now seen as heralding a model cultural shift from romantic style to modernism. Now, this is very important. Prufrock, when it was published, basically the readers could not comprehend the meaning of the poem as they were still very much fascinated by the romantic style of poetry. Even in the Victorian age, romanticism also to some extent dominated, though pessimism and optimism are both present in the poetry of Victorian age. Still, romantic elements were present in the poetry, in the drama, even in the novels of Victorian age. And this poem, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, was a shifting from romantic tradition to modern tradition, and it's a landmark in the literature of in English literature, you can say. Now, why it's a landmark or why it's very important? Because it was a kind of shifting from the romantic style to modern style. So, what are the differences between romanticism and modernism? I discussed in the previous two classes, and when I discussed these things, I told you that these things will be necessary in our understanding of modern literature, or basically when we will start the poetry of T.S. Eliot. Now, the poem's structure was heavily influenced by Eliot's extensive reading of Dante, and makes several references to the Bible and other literary works, including Shakespeare's plays Henry the Fourth, Part Two, Twelfth Night, and Hamlet. And the poetry of 17th century metaphysical poet Andrew Marvell, even John Donne, and the 19th century French symbolist. So, T.S. Eliot was inspired and he was also influenced by the metaphysical poets, and it's very tough to understand T.S. Eliot's poetry because he is that kind of poet who prefers to use allusions from different sources or from different spheres of writing or literature or life as well. He will allude to Dante's Divine Comedy. He will also allude to biblical references. He will also allude to different dramas and different poems, different philosophical thoughts and ideas. And that is why you will see plenty of allusions in T.S. Eliot's poetry. And he was influenced by, not influenced, he alludes to the poetry of Dante, basically the Divine Comedy you will even see in this particular poem. And he sometimes will also allude to the Bible, and sometimes he will allude to, or he will give the reference from Shakespearean plays. And these things make his writing critical, but don't get nervous and don't think that he is completely difficult to understand, or it's not possible to understand T.S. Eliot. It's possible. It's very much possible to understand T.S. Eliot, but it requires, intensive and extensive reading of his poetry. So at the beginning, I want to tell you that he was very much fascinated by the poetry of metaphysical poets like John Donne, Andrew Marvell. So this is one characteristic in him. He is completely against the style of romantic literature, romantic trend of writing literature, and he is completely against the subjectivity in poetry. He prefers objectivity in poetry, and he prefers to use allusions or references from different sources. So these are the things, and he is also influenced by 19th century French symbolists as well. So these are the things you must keep in your mind. Now, Eliot narrates the experience of Prufrock using the stream of consciousness technique developed by his fellow modernist writers. So we are talking about the style, we are talking about the language of T.S. Eliot that we will basically find in this particular poem, Prufrock, and we will also find it in the wasteland. So you will see the technique of, the stream of consciousness technique being used in this particular poem. You will also see another technique. The poem described as a drama of literary anguish is a dramatic interior monologue of an urban man. Now this is another technique in writing poetry, interior monologue. You know what is a monologue, or you know also what is dramatic monologue. Now you have read the poems by Robert Browning, and you must have noticed that Browning used dramatic monologue in his poetry. His famous poems like Andrea del Sarto and Fra Lippo Lippi, Grammarian's Funeral, you must have noticed that he has, Robert Browning used monologue. And what is monologue? Monologue is a kind of device which is used in poetry, where you will see that there is a single speaker and there are listeners as well, and the speaker speaks to the listeners, and the presence of the listeners is basically felt or understood through the expression of the speaker. They are silent listeners. The listener's voice or their remarks are not written, but we can gauge the presence, we can understand the presence of the listeners through the expression of the speaker. Now, what is interior monologue? Interior monologue is different from monologue, or you can also say dramatic monologue. Interior monologue is a kind of conversation within a person. A person, in modern literature, will again and again say that a person possesses at least two selves, and one self talks to another self. So interior monologue means the person is speaking to himself. So this device, many critics say, has also been used in this poem, Prufrock. So two techniques you must keep it in your mind. One is stream of consciousness technique, I discussed in the previous class. The stream of consciousness technique is a kind of device which is used in poetry, in not only in poetry, in different pieces of literature, in order to explore or reveal or unearth internal state of human mind. So stream of consciousness techniques and interior monologue, both these devices have been used by T.S. Eliot in this particular poem. And now let's go to the next part of our discussion. We have discussed over here the style of T.S. Eliot's poetry, and what have we found, what have we observed in the style of T.S. Eliot's poetry. We have noticed one thing, that T.S. Eliot prefers to allude to different sources. Now, he has used references from Dante's Divine Comedy in this particular poem, I mean Prufrock. He has also used references from Bible, and he also alludes to different plays by William Shakespeare. And you will also notice that, and I have already said that he has been greatly influenced by the metaphysical poets, because he was fascinated by the metaphysical poets, and he was again influenced by the French symbolists. So these and finally he has used a stream of consciousness technique and interior monologue technique in his poetry. Now this is the style, these are the ways, these are the things by which we see in the poetry of T.S. Eliot. So remember the style of T.S. Eliot's poetry. Style includes language, style includes the way he composed his poetry. So finally I am repeating the style used by T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot, he prefers to use references, huge references in his poetry, and you will notice it. You will notice it in Prufrock, you will notice it in the Wasteland. And second thing I want to share with you, that he also uses the technique stream of consciousness and interior monologue in his writing. Now, what about the subject matter? If we look at the subject matter of T.S. Eliot's poetry, we are talking about T.S. Eliot now. Now, in the previous two classes, we discussed I mean the subject matters of modern literature. We also discussed different aspects of modern literature. In today's class, our focus is on the poetry of T.S. Eliot, basically Prufrock. Now, what we will see in Prufrock, we will see a kind of physical and intellectual inaction in Prufrock's character. Remember one thing, Prufrock is a person who is basically a representative of all modern human beings. So what you will notice in Prufrock, you will notice in all human beings of modern age. Now, we will see a kind of inaction in his character. Now, this kind of inaction you will also see in other literary pieces. When you will read Waiting for Godot, you will see in Vladimir and Estragon the kind of inaction you will see in the characters of Vladimir and Estragon. You will also see this sort of inaction in other novels, in other plays. But remember, inaction, it's both psychological and physical inaction, is a characteristic of a modern man. Not only that, Prufrock, he is haunted by his memories of unattained carnal love, that means physical love. He is an example of failure. He is a person who has failed in his life. He is at the middle age of his life, and you know that so far he has been not able to fall in love or to develop any love affair. This is a love song. The title indicates that it's a love song, but basically we will hardly find anything called love in this particular poem. But this poem is basically in the guise of a love song. This poem basically focus on the characteristics of modern human beings. Only the name is love song, but what you will see in this poem, you will basically see, you will get the picture of modern human beings in this poem, Prufrock. And apart from that, you will see a kind of decay, you will see alienation in Prufrock's character. I discussed in the previous class that alienation is a characteristic or is an aspect of modern literature. So what is alienation? Alienation is a kind of psychological state when a person starts thinking that he is virtually alone in this world. There is nobody in the world who thinks about him. So this is alienation. You will see this characteristic in Prufrock. You will also see existentialist crisis in Prufrock. What is existentialist crisis? Existentialist crisis is that crisis when a person starts thinking that his existence doesn't have any meaning in this world. So these are the things you will find in the character of Prufrock. So I want to repeat the kind of characteristics you will find in Prufrock. Firstly, you will find that he is a man of inaction. He cannot make things happen. He is not active, rather, he is a passive person. And secondly, he is an alienated person. That means he is fully lonely. He doesn't have any friend and he cannot connect with people. So that is the second thing you will notice. Thirdly, you will see that he suffers from existentialist crisis. That means he doesn't find the meaning of his existence in this world. And finally, I would like to tell you that Prufrock is not simply an individual person, rather Prufrock is a representative of all modern human beings. Prufrock is you, Prufrock is me, Prufrock is everyone of the modern world. So the kind of crisis you will see among modern people, if you look at Prufrock, you will find every human being of the universe. Now we will talk about the title of the poem. The title of the poem is very interesting. The title is The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Now it's an unusual title. Why it's a big title, and the name Prufrock is itself unimpressive and unromantic. And why unimpressive and unromantic? We will explain it. Eliot called the poem a love song in reference to Rudyard Kipling's poem The Love Song of Herr Dial, first published in 1888. In 1959, Eliot addressed a meeting of the Kipling Society and discussed the influence of Kipling upon his own poetry. Now, T.S. Eliot himself, in a meeting, he confessed that he took the first part of his poem, I mean the title of the first part of his poem from the poem written by Kipling, and the name of the poem is The Love Song of Herr Dial. This poem was written by or composed by Kipling, and Eliot has just adopted the first part of the title, The Love Song, from Kipling's poem. And he himself said in a meeting, I am quoting T.S. Eliot, I once wrote a poem called The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. I am convinced that I would never have been called Love Song but for a title of Kipling's that stuck obstinately in my head, The Love Song of Herr Dial. So it would never have been called Love Song. I mean, this poem would never have been called Love Song. Eliot himself confessed in one conference, and he said that he has taken the first part of the title from Kipling's title of a poem. And the interesting part is that the second part, or the name of Prufrock, where he has taken it is not certain, and Eliot never remarked on its origin other than to claim he was unsure of how he came upon the name. Eliot himself was not sure that where did he get the name. So it was he subconsciously probably gave the name. Many scholars and indeed Eliot himself have pointed towards the autobiographical elements in the character of Prufrock, and many critics and even T.S. Eliot himself, sometimes he has hinted that there might be some autobiographical elements in the poem Prufrock, because Eliot at the time of writing the poem was in the habit of rendering his name as T. Starnes Eliot. Now look at the similarity. The title of the poem is The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, and when T.S. Eliot composed this poem, at that time he preferred to use or write his name as T. Starnes Eliot. So J. Alfred Prufrock and T. Starnes Eliot. So you can easily gauge that he maintained a kind of similarity between his own name and the title of the poem. So how much he loved the poem, so how much he was almost Prufrock himself. Now, later he started writing his name as T.S. Eliot, but this practice by T.S. Eliot himself at the time of composing the poem also indicates that there might be some autobiographical elements of the poet himself in this particular poem. Now, it is suggested that the name Prufrock came from Eliot's youth in St. Louis, Missouri. He spent his youth, I mean, T.S. Eliot spent his youth in St. Louis, Missouri, where the Prufrock Lytton Company, a large furniture store, occupied one city block downtown at 422 North 4th Street. Now, it's a company, and the name of the company was Prufrock Lytton Company, and this company, some critics say that T.S. Eliot might have picked the name from Prufrock Lytton Company because when he was young, he used to live in that area, and a company called Prufrock Lytton existed there. So it may be working in the subconscious state of Eliot's mind, and probably he might have picked the name from that source, but nothing is certain. But remember one thing, the name Prufrock, whatever may be the source of the name, what is important that Prufrock, the name itself is unimpressive, unromantic. Why unimpressive and unromantic? Because T.S. Eliot is that type of poet who was against romanticism, and he is basically trying to portray a character named Prufrock in this particular poem who is a representative of modern human beings, who is every man, who is an anti-hero. An anti-hero is a person, the term is very popular in modern literature. An anti-hero is a person who does not share the heroic qualities of the traditional heroes. He is basically a representative of any man. I mean, Prufrock is a representative of all modern human beings. So that can be the reason Eliot has used the name Prufrock, which sounds unromantic and which doesn't sound someone who is hero, rather a person who is very ordinary and who is very simple and who is like you and me. That might be the reason of using the name Prufrock. Now we are starting the poem. The poem starts with an epigraph. Now, what is an epigraph? An epigraph is a kind of quotation. I am talking about this particular poem. Is a kind of quotation which is basically used at the beginning of any kind of writing. It can be poem, it can be any piece of writing. Epigraph is also, you can also say the meaning of the word is also any kind of writing on statue or any monument or something like that. But over here, epigraph is a kind of quotation which is used at the beginning of any piece of writing, and the intention of giving any epigraph is to give a kind of idea and hint about the theme of the poem. I would like to repeat again, epigraph is a kind of quotation which is given at the beginning of a poem. I am talking uh, giving special light on this poem, that's why I am using the term poem. So I am repeating again, epigraph is a kind of quotation which is used at the beginning of poem or any piece of literature in order to indicate or give an idea about the theme of the poem. So epigraph is very important if it is given, and since Eliot is using an epigraph at the beginning of a very famous poem, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, so we need to understand the epigraph. Now, the epigraph of this particular poem has been written in Italian language, and not only Italian, basically it was Tuscan and Florentine dialects that was used in the epigraph. And I must tell you one thing, that which quotation has T.S. Eliot used? T.S. Eliot has used a quotation by Dante. Dante composed the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy is a very famous epic by Dante, and Divine Comedy is divided into three books: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. And this quotation has been taken from Inferno and canto number 27 and line number 6 from 61 to 66. Now, from this source, I mean, T.S. Eliot has used the epigraph of his poem. Now, you know that this is very difficult. Apparently, this is very difficult. But if you once concentrate on the uh, issue of this poem, if you want to concentrate on the aspects of this poem, then things will be much easier. T.S. Eliot has used an epigraph, and this epigraph has been taken from the source Inferno. Inferno is a book of Divine Comedy. Divine Comedy is divided into three books: Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. Divine Comedy is an epic written by Dante. Dante was an Italian poet, and Dante used Tuscan and Florentine dialects, or he used Italian language in Divine Comedy. So these six lines are basically in Italian language. And why I am using Tuscan and Florentine dialects? Because Dante basically used those dialects in this poem, I mean the Divine Comedy. And these dialects, or Dante's language, became very popular later and dominated Italian language, you can also say. Now, what does or what do these six lines mean, and why has T.S. Eliot used these six lines from Dante's Divine Comedy? Because T.S. Eliot wanted to give a kind of idea about the poem, the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. Now, if we want to start the poem, we have to understand the epigraph first. Now, dear students, again I am telling, this epigraph has been taken from Inferno, a book of Divine Comedy. Divine Comedy is an epic by Dante, and these six lines, we have got an English version. This was written in Italian language. And what is the English version? If I but thought that my response were made to one perhaps returning to the world, this tongue of flame would cease to flicker. But since up from these depths no one has yet returned alive, if what I hear is true, I answer without fear of being shamed. Now, if I say that, have you understood? Then it will be an injustice to you, because I am quite sure that you have not understood it. It's not possible to understand unless we know the background, that who is saying this, what does it mean. Since we have to understand Dante's Divine Comedy as well, at least the theme of Divine Comedy, at least we have to develop some ideas about the Divine Comedy. And what did Dante say in the Divine Comedy? What did he say in Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso? So we have to learn those things as well. So let's go to the next slide in order to understand the epigraph. The epigraph of this poem is a six-line quotation from Canto 27 of the Inferno by the Renaissance Italian poet Dante. I have already said the epigraph over here has been, six-line epigraph has been taken from Canto 27 of Inferno by the Italian poet Dante. The Inferno basically means hell. The Inferno tells the story of how a person, Dante, who has messed up his life badly enough to require some help from the nice folks in heaven. Now, the Inferno, if we read the Inferno, what we see, that Dante is the person who wants to request some help from the nice folks in heaven. It's a kind of journey on Dante's part. He is basically he is taking a journey, and according to Christianity, the journey starts with Inferno, and Inferno is hell, and Purgatorio is purgatory, and Paradiso is paradise. So Inferno means hell, and after hell, a person, the soul, not a person, the souls of some persons are shifted to Purgatorio, and then after some purification they are sent to heaven. But this is the style, I am telling again that the souls are first the souls go to inferno or hell, and after that after inferno, some of the souls, not all, some of the souls are allowed to enter in purgatory, and after that, through the purification process, some souls are allowed in heaven. But there are some souls who permanently stay in inferno or hell. Who are those souls? They are damned souls, like Dr. Faustus. You can remember the story of Dr. Faustus. So souls like Dr. Faustus permanently live in inferno. They have no possibility to go to purgatorio or to heaven. So these souls, they permanently stay in inferno or hell. Now, in order to scare him away from sin and other bad things, heaven sends another poet named Virgil to give Dante a guided tour through the horrors of hell. Now, Virgil is another great poet. I am not going to describe him because things will be, in that case, very confusing for you. Now, Dante is guided by Virgil because he will have a tour in order to see the horrors of hell. So along the way, he meets a lot of evil and misguided people. So remember one thing, who is taking the journey? Dante. And where do we find this journey? We find this journey in the poem, I mean in the epic written by Dante himself. And the epic is divided into three books. In Inferno, Dante is taking a journey to hell, and he is accompanied by Virgil. Now, the quote from this epigraph is said by one of the characters in the eighth circle of hell. Now, when Dante was taking the journey in hell, he came across, or he met some characters, and he was basically observing the states, or he was observing the kind of punishment the characters were given in hell. And at the eighth section or circle of hell, the hell had nine circles. And in the eighth circle, he met someone. And who is that person? Where some of the worst are stuck for eternity. Where some of the worst souls, or some of the damned souls, basically those damned souls are preserved in the eighth circle of that hell. And Dante met one such soul. This person's name is Guido da Montefeltro, and when Dante asks to hear his story, here is what he says. Now, when Dante wants to hear from Guido that what is the reason you have been kept here, you have been preserved here throughout your life, then Guido replies and he says something to Dante. Now, what he says are basically the 6 lines that we see in the epigraph of this poem. I am telling you again in brief, just follow me. There is an epigraph of this poem, and what is the significance of this epigraph? Let's go back. This is the original epigraph, and this epigraph has been taken from Divine Comedy, I mean Inferno, the book Inferno, and Inferno is a part of Divine Comedy, and the Divine Comedy is written by Dante, and this is the English version of that epigraph. And what does this English version indicate, or what is the story of the Inferno? I told you in brief. Now, when Dante asked Guido that what was the reason he was permanently kept in the eighth circle of hell, that soul, Guido, he replied, "If I thought that my reply would be to someone who would ever return to earth, this flame would remain without further movement, but as no one has ever returned alive from this gulf, If what I hear is true, I can answer you with no fear of infamy. Now, Guido says that I am staying in a place from where nobody can go back to the world. And Guido speaks in the flame of fire. In hell, there are different sorts of punishment. The tongue that Guido has, his tongue, when he speaks, it basically flames. He talks with the flame of fire. So this is the kind of punishment he is experiencing in hell. And he says that I want to tell you, okay, I will tell you why I have been preserved here. But since nobody can return from hell to world, then I have no problem to tell you. But why he is quite unwilling to say that why he has been preserved here, we can understand he did some wrong in the world. He did some evil things in the world. What does this quote mean? Well, Dante is really curious to know why Guido ended up so far down in hell. But Guido is selfish. He is afraid that people back on earth will find out about the horrible stuff he did. He is concerned about his reputation as well. So, what Guido says that since nobody returns from hell to the world, so that's why I have no problem to tell you these things. On the other hand, Guido knows that no one has ever entered hell and made it out again, so he figures that it's safe to tell his story because Dante is stuck here. Unfortunately for Guido, Dante is the first human ever to be allowed to pass through hell. One other thing we should mention, Guido doesn't even have a body in hell. Now, these are the things you can practice afterwards, but remember one thing, that the epigraph of this particular poem is basically the expression of Guido, who is permanently living in hell and who is speaking in the flame of fire, and who is telling Dante that since nobody can return from hell to the world, so I have no problem to tell you the evil things that I did on earth, and as a result of those evil things, I am experiencing punishment now in this hell, and I am permanently staying over here. Now, last thing, essentially Guido committed terrible atrocities in war. So Guido is a person who did violent things in war when he was alive in the world. And not only that, he, like Dr. Faustus, did one thing. He wanted to forgive himself before before he committed these atrocities. He basically thought he could outsmart God. He challenged the authority of God. He thought that he was as powerful as God, what Dr. Faustus did in the play Dr. Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. Now, when he was alive, I mean, when Guido was in the world, he challenged the authority of God. So, as a punishment of his challenging the authority of God, he was damned. He was permanently staying in hell, in the eighth circle of hell. And he was replying to the question of Dante, and he replied, as I said earlier, that since nobody can go back to the world, so I have no hesitation to tell you that I did some evil things in the world, and I challenged the authority of God, and I went against the doctrine of God. That's why I am suffering. Now, dear students, why does Eliot choose this epigraph for his poem? Well, it suggests a couple of things. First, that Prufrock might not be a poem about good people. Now, the poem starts with the reply of Guido, who is a damned soul in hell. Then, why does T.S. Eliot start the poem, the love song, with the reply of a person who is permanently living in hell? Probably Eliot wants to probably Eliot wants to prepare his readers that what is going to happen, or what the readers will see in this particular poem, is not about the love affair of Prufrock. Rather, they will observe a world which has almost turned into a hell because of the relationship among human beings because of the kind of mechanical life they are leading in this world, because of the kind of mechanical relationship they are having in this world, because no nothing good is existing, or nothing good exists in the world anymore. Probably Eliot is preparing his readers to observe a world which is very close to a hell. And secondly, it tells us that this fellow Prufrock, who is singing his love song, might be concerned about his reputation, like Guido. Like Guido, Prufrock had never intended his story to be told, and so by quoting Guido, Eliot reveals his view of Prufrock's love song. This can be another reason that Prufrock, like Guido, doesn't want to let people know about the internal action or about the experiences he is having, he is basically facing in the world. Prufrock himself is suffering from multiple personalities of sorts, and that he embodies both Guido and Dante in the Inferno analogy. Now, if we compare Prufrock's state with the state of Guido and Dante. Now, Dante was the visitor. He was visiting hell. He was taking experience through his visit in hell. He asked Guido to express his experiences or feelings. Guido replied that what he was feeling. So, if we compare these two characters with this poem, or with this character Prufrock, then who is Prufrock? Is Prufrock Dante or is Prufrock Guido? One is the storyteller, the other the listener. Now, who will be the storyteller? Prufrock is the storyteller. Now, if Prufrock is the storyteller, then who is the listener? The listener is someone else. Over there, the listener is Dante, because Guido was speaking and Dante was listening. So Guido was the speaker and Dante was the listener. Over here, Prufrock is the speaker, and who is the listener? When he will say, "Let us go then, you and I," that's the beginning of the poem. Then, "Let us go then, you and I is Prufrock, I is Guido. And who is this you?" The reader is granted the power to gaze who is this you. Now, this is the most important part of the beginning section, that we find a kind of analogy, we find a kind of similarity between hell and the kind of life Prufrock is leading in the world. Prufrock, like Guido, is speaking in the flame of fire. Guido was speaking through the flames of fire. Prufrock is also speaking through the flames of fire. But Prufrock is in the world. But the language he is using, the language itself is burning like fire. And the listener over there is Dante, but over here the listener can be any male person. The listener can be the other self of Prufrock himself. So it's the liberty of the readers. The readers can gaze, the readers can accept either the other self of Prufrock as the listener or another male person as the listener. Moreover, this starting gives us another idea, the concept of no exit. Once a person is permanently in hell, once a person is damned in hell, he does not have any possibility to go to purgatorio or to heaven or to have any exit from hell. So Guido was living in hell, so he doesn't have any possibility to go anywhere from the hell. Similarly, Prufrock is living in such a circumstance, Prufrock is living in such a condition of his life from where he will have no exit and no hope to have a better life. So that is the starting of this poem, which doesn't show or which doesn't give us anything optimistic, which rather makes us feel that we human beings are stuck in that type of life. We human beings are almost damned like the souls in hell, according to T.S. Eliot, and we will try to exit from this situation, but probably it is as difficult to exit from this world or exit from this life as it is for Guido to exit from hell. So remember these things, remember the starting, and we have just started our poem, and we will continue this poem even in our next classes. I will take two more classes on this poem, and after that we will start the Wasteland. So till my next class, I would like to tell you goodbye. Thank you very much.